Joel Baker with American Giants. I thought I would do today's video on the Tucson, Arizona Paul Bunyan statue. And the reason I thought we'd do this is because I have been getting so many emails and comments in the last week or two about this giant, and that is because his future is uncertain. It looks like he might be up for sale, and this happens to be one of those giants that's very iconic or been in a town for quite a long time. And we've seen this happen before, so I thought it'd be fun to do a dive into. I've never really talked specifically about the Tucson, Arizona giant before, so let's get into it. This guy actually is pretty cool because he is one of the first Paul Bunyans that was actually made by International Fiberglass. When this all started, it was actually Pruitt Fiberglass who made the first Paul Bunyan Muffler Man, and Bill Swan sculpted it and made it right there in Lawndale, California. It was an order he got in Sacramento who wanted a Paul Bunyan figure. So Bill Swan made the 20-foot giant, and that was the first Muffler Man right there in Lawndale, California. Bob Pruitt had made a number of these Paul Bunyans and sold them, but in the fall of 1963, is around the end of the year, is when they sold the entire business to International Fiberglass and Steve Dashew. And when they got it, then they started making Paul Bunyans. And what's neat about the Tucson Bunyan is that this was actually one of the very first Paul Bunyans sold and made by International Fiberglass. The giant was sold to Leo's Auto Supply, and what's cool is it was the early days of International Fiberglass selling the Bunyans, and so they made a big deal about using images of Leo with his giant in their advertising. International Fiberglass had a fantastic marketing director. Her name was Violet Winslow, and she was the secretary of Stanley Dashew, who was Steve's dad, who was working in the banking industry. And she was very experienced, and she did an incredible job of marketing International Fiberglass products in all kinds of trade magazines, as well as their own advertising material that they would send out. And if you look closely at early International Fiberglass advertising, you definitely see the Tucson, Arizona Bunyan and Leo in some of these shots. Over the years, the name changed to Don's Hot Rod Shop, and Don is Leo's son. And at that time, they kept the giant, and they also expanded the grounds, and the place, the look of the place changed a little bit, but the Bunyan stayed on. I first visited the Bunyan in 2012. It was pretty early on, and when I was researching Muffler Man, and I realized right away that this was a classic example of a Bunyan, and he had one of the few original axes made by International Fiberglass. At the time, there was just a chain link or a small chain fence around his feet. And years later, when I went back actually in late last year in 2024, I actually noticed that they have made a brick barrier around him. And this is because he's on a really busy intersection, and they're probably wanting to protect him a little bit from vehicles or maybe people. But these days, Don's son Donnie is actually the one that runs the hot rod shop, and everything has been pretty much normal until recently. Muffler Men coming up for sale is actually a really interesting kind of a phenomenon, if you will, when it happens, because remember, these giants, like this one in Tucson, it was set up in 1964. So, what has that been? Like 61 years that many of these giants have been standing. And it's part of the town. It's part of the look of the place. And oftentimes when these disappear or go away, it's quite a bit of talk in a local town, as it should be. It's a big deal. Something big is changing. It reminds me of Bruce Kennedy, who runs Bell Plastics. He got the giant that was in Hayward for many years in California. And when he went and purchased that and took it down, people were actually throwing bottles at him as he disassembled the giant, because it was a part of the town and they weren't happy that it was leaving. And we see some of that sentiment happening already on social media and some discussions I've read in Tucson, and this is completely natural. You have people that have all these memories. I mean, people going to the store or driving by him to go to school every day. And all of a sudden, well, he might not be here tomorrow. So that creates a lot of discussion. When you have a business like Don's Hot Rod Shop that's going out of business, they have a few options. They can find somebody locally that wants to buy it. They can advertise locally that it's for sale, and they start, maybe selling off everything, including the Giant. And we've seen this happen with businesses before. American Giants is always an option. That's exactly what we do. We take people who have a Giant they want to sell, and then we advertise to their exact audience and help them get the best price that they can. And so many of you have been around for a number of our sales and seen some of the Giants that we sell. And that's another option for sellers when they want to sell a Giant. Another thing we've seen is that you have a Giant come up for sale and it's included with the building. And there's a number of cases with this where instead of selling the Giant separately, the owners are like, well, it's been with the building all these years, and I'll probably get a little bit more money if I sell it with the building, and it'll be up to the new owners of the building what they want to do with it. We saw this happen with a Mr. Bendo in Blue Ridge, Georgia. The hobby store was sold to a dentist, and it turned into a dentist office, and the Giant was sold with the building. The Gemini Giant, originally, that was the plan for that. They were going to sell the property, and the Gemini Giant would go with it. That ended up not happening, and the Gemini Giant was sold separately. Another good example of this is the Chef Muffler Man in Springfield, Missouri. This was ordered right before the pandemic for an outdoor food truck venue, and right on Route 66. It was a great idea, but it opened practically right when the pandemic was in full swing, and it didn't make it. And the property is still up for sale, as well as the Giant. The Giant is included in the property. There's been people who are interested in purchasing this Muffler Man that looks like a chef, but he's for sale with the property. Another good example is the Cowboy in Norwich, Connecticut, that was at Surplus Unlimited. And this Cowboy was a fixture in town for many years, probably a retired Phillips 66 Cowboy. And when they sold that building, the Cowboy went with it. Today, if you visit there, it is the only Harbor Freight in the country that has a Muffler Man in front of it. And one last example is the Pink Elephant in Livingston, Illinois, that has lots of Giants and figures and some Muffler Men. And that was sold last year, I believe. And that's another great example where all the Giants, except for the Unirogal, which they kept, all the rest went with the sale of the building. So this is not uncommon where the owners want to include the Muffler Man with the sale of the building. It makes an interesting situation because then now you have somebody who's probably mostly interested in the location and the building itself for a business and not necessarily looking for a Muffler Man. And so the big question in Tucson is, what's going to happen to the Giant? Are the new owners going to want to keep it there on the corner of Glen and Stone, or are they going to want to sell it? Are they going to sell it to another buyer, another collector in another state, or are they going to work with somebody in town to have it relocated? And these are all the big questions on social media right now that are floating around. Our position has always been that there's some great history with Muffler Men, and there's a few at locations across the country that are original, like Babes in San Jose. It was purchased originally from International Fiberglass, and it's been there the whole time. So it's really nice when those longtime giants of a town can stay where they're at. So we always hope that's what can happen. It doesn't always happen, and sometimes we've even been approached to help sell giants that have just been around forever, and it's kind of sad, but it's life. So we hope that Tucson gets to keep their Bunyan, and maybe if it doesn't stay on that corner, it can go to a new spot like the Gemini Giant did. But it is good to see that the town is discussing it and talking about it and seeing if there's ways to save it, because we have seen in the past, like the Mount Vernon Unirogal, that all the discussion happened after she was long gone. The Giant is a fantastic representation of an early International Fiberglass, classic Paul Bunyan with a blue pants, red shirt, and yellow knit cap. So We look forward to seeing what his future holds, and we're all keeping an eye on Tucson.